Hey, Brown Mamas community and other folks who might be tuning in. It is so nice to come to y'all again with more information about the city's comprehensive planning process, but also just to be, to show y'all some faces of folks who are living in the city, who are experiencing the same things as you are experiencing, and hopefully to give you some optimism about the future of the city of Pittsburgh. So if you don't know me, if you're coming to my timeline or Brown Mamas timeline or something for the first time, my name is Muffy Mendoza. I'm the founder of Brown Mamas. We are an organization that supports Black mothers in the Pittsburgh region and beyond. And I have some lovely women with me today who are going to introduce themselves. So.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Naccarati-Chapkis, and I'm the Executive Director of Women for a Healthy Environment. We're a nonprofit here in Southwestern PA, focusing on the environmental exposures that impact our health.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle, for being here. So excited. Muffy, thank you for hosting. My name is Alyssa Lyon. I'm a community engagement consultant for the City of Pittsburgh Comprehensive Plan. Just a quick plug. After this event, we will be hosting a public forum on Thursday, June 12th. In the North Side. So please, please, please register. Please, please, please join us. And thank you all for being here once again today. I'm just going to kick off this conversation. To be candid, I wanted to have a conversation about climate impact, why it's important to the plan, why should we all not drop what we're doing, but stop a little what we're doing and focus our attention to the comprehensive plan. And so, Michelle, I wanted to invite you to have a candid conversation on why does climate justice matter in the context of Pittsburgh's future? And what does it look like in real life for communities like Brown Mamas and for people that look like Muffy and I, and you, for women as well?
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me, and it's so nice to be with both of you. Climate change shows up in everything that we do. And, we are at the tipping point, and this is why this conversation is so important to have to, bring awareness and to give people an understanding of how it impacts daily lives and then the things that we can do about it. And so we'll break down some of those things that you just asked, Alyssa, in terms of how does it show up in our daily lives, in the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat. We can start there. And so, one of the things that we see in terms of air quality is climate change is, we definitely see the correlation between climate change and the air that we breathe. So we see these more frequent and intense wildfire smoke events. And people may say, well, that doesn't really affect us here in Pittsburgh. But if you saw the news over the last couple of weeks, our department, our state, PA Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, was spending a lot of time in the central part of the state fighting wildfires, and we hadn't seen that before. And just this past weekend, we had the air quality alerts come out from the EPA saying that we were in the what's known as the orange zone for unhealthy air quality, a code orange. And I was thinking, what the heck's going on here? It was unusual. Well, here, our region was seeing the effects of the wildfires in Canada. And so as a result, our region was getting blanketed with what we know as particulate matter that gets deep into our lungs and impacts our respiratory and our cardiac systems. And that's really important for everyone, but especially children who are most vulnerable, the elderly, and all of those who have respiratory and cardiac disease. And so, the wildfires that we see being driven by climate, certainly then industrial emissions, which also plays into this, and even things like building demolition that contribute to poor air quality and air pollution. So there's a lot of those factors that speak to air quality and the correlation between climate change. We see a lot with water quality as well.
Before you move on to water quality, Michelle, can we just pause on that real quick about the air quality? Because I think we really have to talk. We really have to speak in like what people understand. So I remember at one time I was at a conference and I was going around to all the different trade booths, and I had stopped at the LG booth, and I told them I was from Pittsburgh. And they had like all of these hypoallergenic products, and they were like, Pittsburgh is one of our main markets.
Yeah,
because Pittsburgh has such horrible air quality. So many kids there have asthma. So many parents there our adults there suffer with things like bronchitis regularly and things like that. So they need our products. So just speaking in terms of like everyday terms that folks are going to understand, like this is why all the kids in your community have asthma. This is why every February your kid is suffering with throat issues and ear issues and all of those things. So it's not just, what's in the air that we're thinking about from a ground level. This is why this is important, because these are issues that your kids, your grandparents, you don't have to have if the air quality is better.
Muffy, you raise a really good point. So we have a greater percentage of asthma in our region compared to the national average. And so we have more cases of asthma. We have more trips to the emergency department for the need for rescue inhalers and things of that nature. And, one of the things that we talk about is in terms of what you can do. And so having the community members become educated for what they can do and how to be alert to this, I think is really important, to your point too. And so our smartphones have an app on it that show us what the air quality is, and it's connected and tied into the national air quality standard. So if people can either look on their phone or they can go to what's known as airnow.gov and just plug in their address or their city, and it will show by color what the air quality is in your region right now. And what it does is it picks up all the monitors that are stationed throughout Allegheny County, for instance. And that is a really good way of getting a sense of what's the air quality right now and how do I plan for my day, right? You had talked about asthma and that real-time exposure and experience. And so not only is it from industrial sources and wildfire smoke, but as it relates to climate change and air quality, we have longer allergy seasons. And that's another point of it. People are exposed to pollen and to ragweed earlier in the years and later in the fall. So we've got a longer time of that exposure to the environmental, like pollen and other triggers that really impact people's air quality and their ability to, breathe healthy.
Right.
I have this, I think Muffy had a similar question, and I think I have a similar question is underserved communities, Black and Brown communities, marginalized communities are always the ones experiencing the more disproportionate impacts of climate change. We know that is true for environmental justice. That's true socioeconomically. But not a lot of us see the issues. Not a lot of those communities see the issues. And so part of Muffy's question is, what role should those specific communities play in shaping climate justice? And I think my same question is, what does community-driven climate action look like without further burdening those communities? And I know, I'm not saying the idea of compensating folks to do work is bad or those kinds of things, but we often end up turning to residents to fix systemic issues.
Yeah.
And that always feels so much more burdensome to me.
Right.
What role do we have other than calling our senators and showing up? What does community action driven work look like?
I think that, as we start off the conversation and talking about areas where we can see climate change impacting our daily lives, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat, the food scarcity that we have, as an example, underserved communities are on the front line of climate change. And so there's an important role for communities to play in shaping these climate solutions. And that's really critical. It's foundational to the work that everyone is doing. And so thinking about how communities develop and shape that conversation rather than being shared the plan, as an example, being integral to that development of that plan for, the climate action plan, the comprehensive plan, those types of documents and systems thinking that move us forward. So the residents have the intimate understanding of the local challenges. They know where flooding has occurred, in these extreme weather events, these rainfalls. We are this year today way above our average precipitation of rainfall. They can say, this is how it's being impacted in my community. So we, and let's prioritize local leadership. So empowering and investing in community-based organizations and grassroots in leaders in that movement who are already doing this critical work on the ground. And so, I think that that's really an important role to play, because the climate solutions, they shouldn't create these new burdens or perpetuate these existing inequalities. That's a part of the solution. So, community members can talk about what their ideas are and their vision for transitioning, for instance, to a green economy. And how does that include job training and opportunities for residents in our own communities, in our own backyards. And so making sure that underserved communities have a strong voice, that's a critical voice to advocate for these policies that protect their health and well-being and that of the next generation, is really quite critical.
And I want to say that I don't think that it's possible when you are a frontline receiver, in essence, of drama and trauma in your community, in your home, to not in some way be burdened by getting through it, like overcoming it, because we are the receivers. And at the end of the day, we're not going to get what we need if our voices aren't the loudest voices at the table, because the powers that be have proven that they're not going to just listen to us if we just talk. We have to talk and we have to act. We have to change our actions. We have to show up and say what needs to be said, even when it's unpopular. And we really have to force change by being the brick that will not be moved. So I think it is just really difficult it's really difficult to not be burdened by a problem that is so burdensome to you as an individual. I think it's really about just recognizing that we are the change, we are the change. There is no change that's coming if it's not from us, because the other people are not as bothered by not having the change as we are. It's unfortunate, but it was real.
So true. So, women and mothers who understand these daily realities of neighborhoods is really the essential voice to have around the table, in terms of highlighting the disparities that exist, calling out the disparities in terms of access to green space and to clean air and sustainable housing and safe transportation, all of those things that are really important for us. And so it's really, quite critical to ensure that people are informed and that we make it accessible, right? How do we make these dialogues and these spaces accessible to everybody, thinking about all of the other challenges that exist in just everyday living, right? And so we have to be putting a new way to engage on the table so that it lessens the burden and makes it easy for people to show up and participate.
And one more thing I want to say is just in terms of this new way to engage. I know for me right now in life, I'm really focused in on just changing my own day-to-day behaviors when it comes to how I'm thinking about being a catalyst for change in my environment. So whether that means, like, my sister just did a micro garden and planted all of these foods. And I'm excited to be able to go over there and get some food instead of going to the grocery store, and, creating more burden on a system that's already overburdened. So just thinking about how can we change our day-to-day actions. You don't have to be a protester. You don't have to be a politician. Like, you can show up in your day-to-day life differently and affect climate change and be a force for, environmental power in your community, even if you're not the person who is on the front lines. Alyssa, I can tell you want to say something.
No, I think some of the things that you were saying, like, we need to be burdened by the things that burden us. I'm kind of still taking that all in, because I'm looking at it as this perspective of, well, the system did that. Like, the system needs to rectify itself and get out of the way.
And it did.
Right?
And it did.
But the system was never made for us to feel safe and healthy and successful and sustainable. So we do need to burden ourselves with that. And then the other thing that I'm really just kind of marinating in that space and letting that influence my perspective. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about, I think, is the engagement piece, but I lost it. And so, but as I'm sitting here talking to you both, and I know this question feels very futile, Black and brown and other marginalized communities throughout Pittsburgh face barriers when participating in climate planning. Why?
Yeah.
And I know in Pittsburgh we have a very cyclical cycle of like very weird fatiguing our leaders. And so I also think that could be a barrier. Like we are constantly pulling on the same people, and there's fatigue in planning in that. So why is there, and also Muffy, I think this is a question for you too, because you deal with brown moms, and we know that socioeconomic issues take precedent over climate action. Usually falls at the bottom of the list in these neighborhoods when priority. And so how do we continue to break down barriers to climate planning for these communities?
That's such a good question.
You know,
it is a good question. I think that one of the key things that you're doing today is really recognizing that climate change is really deeply intertwined with racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice, health equity. Having that discussion about, building bridges across different movements and understanding all these struggles that are interconnected is a really important place to be in. And having, leading off of what Muffy had said earlier, is the micro garden as an example. There are things that people can do. I mean, climate change it feels heavy, right? I mean, there's a lot that we have to be concerned about for sure. And, thinking about in our region in Pittsburgh, right, we've got a strong history of resilience and community. But Muffy had said something earlier about really thinking about approaching community organizing and advocacy with this trauma-informed lens, which is really important. Making sure we're creating spaces that are safe and respectful and conducive to this learning and healing and empowerment. But then thinking about those practical things, right? How do we reduce our waste, and how do we conserve energy and support local green businesses and support our local farmers markets, advocating for sustainable practices in institutions that are, perhaps one of the higher emitters of energy sources across this region. But, just in terms of day-to-day operation and thinking about how we're reducing our waste and consumption and shopping local are all really important drivers of really making an impact to addressing climate change. So, we can think about as simple as transforming, our bulbs to LED and conserving energy that way, or putting a tabletop induction stove that you can get off of online instead of our gas-powered stoves, and converting that, because frankly, we know that a lot of poor indoor air quality comes right in our kitchen at the stove when we're cooking. So putting an induction stove top, it conserves energy. Those are just some things that we can really be mindful about, using those refillable containers and buying in bulk. Those are all some of those very small things that add up to making an impact.
It's so funny that you mentioned the gas stove. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
My wife and I had been living in our house for 4 years with a gas leak that
you didn't know about.
Didn't know. So we would smell something downstairs, but we were like, oh, we're fine. And so we did some research, right? What can gas leaks, how can that affect you? Depression, mood swings, headaches, those kinds of things. And we always only attributed that to living in North Braddock, right down the street from the plant. Experiencing environmental unsafety and harm in our home, and just like whatever, right? So, wow. And I love my gas stove. And every time I see an electric stove, I'm always like, whoa, how do you use this, right? Yeah. But there is a difference. There is a difference. Go ahead, Muffy.
I just wanted to say, I think for Black and brown folks, or any folks that have experienced a lot of harm in their lives, not only from, family members and trauma, but just from the environment, from your community, I think there's something to be said for like the embodiment process and how that leads us to be more receptive to what's happening outside of ourselves. So I think for many Black and brown folks, one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to get involved when we're thinking about climate change, when we're thinking about environmental justice and things like that, is because we really are not in tune with the injustices that have happened inside of our own bodies. And therefore, it is very difficult to take on that extra burden. It's like not another thing. Like I can't take on another thing. And so I think for me, what I would really encourage the women who are watching this to do is to really start understanding how this is affecting your body and feeling into that. In Brown Mamas, we talk a lot about womb health and the need for womb health and the need to really allow the womb space as a creation mechanism to take up space in terms of our day-to-day acknowledgement that we're living beings. And so really understanding how these things are affecting our ability to express and to receive in our day-to-day lives. So when we're talking about, pharmaceutical companies and the flushing of, farm meds down into the water supply and us then ingesting that water and thinking about how that is affecting why we have 3 grandparents who've died from cancer. And that, residual feeling on the body and how that is affecting us. So when I'm thinking about these things that are affecting us from a communal, from a societal perspective, I'm always trying to take it back into my own body and think about how this is affecting my own body on a day-to-day basis and utilizing that as a catalyst to do better in my environment and not necessarily taking on the ownership of it. Like Alyssa said, like we can't, society broke it. We didn't break it. So we can't take on the ownership. I mean, we're a part of society, but in many ways, human beings within a society are most of the time responding to the stimuli that is provided by those who are in power, especially when we're in environments where we feel hopeless and powerless. And oftentimes Pittsburghers are experiencing, specifically Black and Brown Pittsburghers are experiencing Pittsburgh as a place where we don't have power, where we don't have hope. And so we're responding to the stimuli in our environment, which does not take away the responsibility of participating in it. But what it does do is allows us to give ourselves grace in terms of how we deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So I really want to encourage people to, like, even showing up at the public forum, that for me is an embodiment practice of individuality. It is me saying I can choose where I take my body and how I show up with my body in these spaces. And that doesn't mean that everything is going to change overnight, but it does mean that I'm showing up with my body. My children see me showing up. My partner sees me showing up. My friends and family members see me showing up. And hopefully through me having this embodiment practice of taking care of my body in a way that is helpful for the environment, you can have the same thing too.
To respond to that, Muffy, you and Alyssa are amazing examples of really prioritizing wellness and rest. And this is a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. And so you provide those spaces for rest and self-care and collective healing. And so, I think that people lean in on that, and that's really important. As we take these really heavy topics in terms of climate change and the impact around us, there are ways to lean into that and to amplify where these moments of joy are and where people are creative and can connect with the climate movement in a way that brings them joy, right? Whether that's through art and music, storytelling, or just community conversation is really important. But one of the things I keep going back to, and I've seen in community, talking with community, is that this intergenerational knowledge sharing is really, really impactful too. And so honoring that wisdom and the resilience of elders in the community is just something that I think I see people spending more time in, and particularly Black women who have really navigated the systems of injustice for these generations. And so how do we learn from our elders and the passing on of that real ecological knowledge that they've seen for the last 40, 50, 60 years is, I think, really important too, because we learn from our elders. And, there's in the climate space, this notion of, this is all something that is for instance, these once in a lifetime flood events. I was talking to some women over the weekend. She was 70 and her mother 90, and said, we had experienced across our city significant flooding over the weekend, right? All across the region. And they said, we've never in our 70 and 90 years have ever seen this before. And that was real trauma, right? Because these individuals were losing everything and, had water to the first floor. And so here we have this now another space of really having trauma and healing from that. But, it was from this significant storm event that people hadn't ever experienced before. And that's the realism and of what climate change is doing to us daily.
Mm-hmm.
I have a comment, and then I have one question that I feel like would be a good bow for both of y'all to tap to wrap this up with. And this has been such a fruitful conversation. Thank you both. I want to uplift the Cancer Economy Network of Southwestern PA for 1 second, because they do have a healing and justice working group. And I remember being a part of that group because we were talking about equity and equity and equity. And I was like, cancer is also about healing. It's not just about getting it and being free from it. It's also about people returning back to unhealthy communities where they received the cancer. So what is the healing and justice part of environmental justice? And so there's another question that I think Muffy had that's so beautiful that I just want to throw in the atmosphere and let it resonate is, what does it look like to lead climate action from a place of healing, mutual aid, and communal care? So my final question for y'all is, as you marinate on that, is if we get this right, when we get this right, I want to speak positivity in the air. When we get this right, when climate justice is fully integrated into Pittsburgh's community comprehensive plan, Pittsburgh's 2050 vision, what will our neighborhoods look and feel like? And it's good to imagine. It's good to leave on a good imaginary note, and imagination is good. And so what will our neighborhoods look and feel like when we get this right?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I think it's all about beauty for everybody, because I think Pittsburgh is, I travel a lot. Pittsburgh is a beautiful city.
Yes.
Like when I go home, I'm like, do people know that Pittsburgh is like legit a beautiful city?
Mm-hmm.
Like for the most part, it's clean. It is still a metro area, but there is so much green. When it is spring and summer and even fall in Pittsburgh, it is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. But then you go to a neighborhood where there's 50 million dilapidated houses. Mm-hmm. There's, a church, a
Dollar Tree,
and the usual suspects.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's like, why is beauty only for some people? Mm-hmm. Why do I have to go so far outside of my neighborhood to see beauty when there is literally beauty everywhere in Pittsburgh? Mm-hmm. So I feel like if we get environmental justice right, then everyone will say they live in a beautiful community, because it will in fact be beautiful, and not just on the outside, but on the inside too. The people will resonate with beauty because it's something that is coming from the inside. It is not something that we merely have to view when we go to Frick Park. Yeah. It's something that I can walk outside of my door and access. And I don't think that we give enough credence to like eye candy.
Yes.
And how it inspires you to do better and be better when you can just look outside and see a tree and a blue sky and a flower blooming and somebody growing tomatoes across the street. Like, it inspires us. Yeah. And beauty for all. That's what I say.
That's beautiful.
I love that, Muffy. And one of the things that I think about in between thinking and looking at Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia as an example, Pittsburgh does have a lot of green spaces. It does have tree canopy. Now, our friends at Tree Pittsburgh are doing a lot more in that space, obviously, right? But compared to Philadelphia, I mean, that is a heat island, and they don't have the amount of green space that we do. And so how do we lean in and protect and preserve what we have, right? And thinking about that access, but then, how does that envision for the future? And so, Alyssa, to your point, in some spaces, we're starting to get it right, but we've got more work to do. And so I think that is my takeaway is that we are making progress. And so people have something to look toward and say, we're doing good in some aspects, but we've got a road ahead of us. Again, it's the marathon. We'll get there collectively together. But then also, thinking about where investment has to be made. And so I think the comp plan is a good place for that. As Muffy's talking about blight in neighborhoods, what does it look like then to have these sustainable environments that everybody has access to? And we think about blight and how does that get addressed, where it speaks to the need for safe, and I'll say healthy every single time, affordable housing. Affordable housing was a huge issue, that we've heard a lot about over the last couple of years, frankly. And so thinking about that, what does it look like if we're putting new housing or renovating housing in spaces that are desperately needed? How do we do that with the aspect of climate in mind, so that these are the most energy efficient spaces? And, that's something else that I think about. I think about that in terms of where the children are going to school, where the children are going to their childcare centers, and how each of those spaces that they're in are embodying that healthy wellness space that, are needed, especially in this time of extreme weather events and in high heat that we're going to be no doubt facing in the summertime.
This was great. This is all I had.
You have to answer the question.
Oh, I have to answer the question. I didn't want to. I think the same thing. I think aesthetic. I think how you feel about yourself when you walk outside, the air that you breathe. Mm-hmm. I think all of that plays a role into how you show up in the day. And so I do believe in clean, not clean, but aesthetically pleasing, beautiful communities. And I'm not just talking about trees. I'm talking about culturally relevant spaces. I'm talking about art. I'm talking about a blacktop in a Black neighborhood. People can play basketball. Those generational spaces where we can learn from one another. Where I think it's the beauty that you were talking about. I think it's the sustainability that you're talking about, Michelle. But it's also about the ability to create the own identity of that neighborhood that you're protecting and keeping healthy. And I think that's important. I think there's a lot of neighborhoods in Pittsburgh and they have their own identities. But let's set them up to be sustainable and they can continue with their sustainable identity. And I think that is where, it can't be some are healthy and sustainable and some look good and sustainable. It should be, we've defined it for ourselves, but they have the tools to make sure that it remains and it maintains. And so, I really appreciate
a future where everyone thrives, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this how we lean into this communal care and everyone is thriving, I think is,
Yeah. And how they define to thrive is up to them.
Exactly. That's right. Not for me, but to define, but for,
Yes. No one else should be able to define how they survive. We should be able to be defining how we thrive. And free from the definition of how you think we should survive.
Exactly.
So join us Thursday, the transition, the public forum, just transition. Michelle, Muffy, this was fantastic conversation.
It was great. It was so great to see both of you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And thank you, Dina Blackwell, for your comments. I see them.
Everyone who joined us live, we'll chat with you soon. Thanks again.
We'll see you. Take care.